This event could not have been possible without the generous help of the following Platinum partners: PropertyRadar and Sean O'Toole, Housing Wire, the Apartment Owners Association, the San Diego Creative Real Estate Investors Association and President Bill Tan, Investors Workshops and Sean Watkins, Angel Bronzegeist and Sarah Benora, Invest Club for Women and Iris Veneration and Bobby Alexander, San Jose Real Estate Investors Association and Geraldine Barry, MVT Productions, Rhoda Construction, Wilson Investment Properties, and White House Catering. For event video and information, visit isurvivedrealestate.com. The Norris Group would like to thank its gold sponsors for supporting I Survived Real Estate: Adrenaline Athletics, Claudia Buys Houses, Coldwell Banker Town & Country, Elite Auctions, Phoebe, for investors by investors, Home Vestors, In a Day Development, Inland Empire Investors Forum, Inland Valley Association of Realtors, Investor Experts, Inc., John Merrill Investments, Inc., Keystone CPA, Las Brisas Escrow, Lavis Associates, Northern California Real Estate Investors Association, Northern San Diego Real Estate Investors Association, Orange County Real Estate Investors Association, Orange County Investment Club Phoebe, Personal Real Estate Magazine, Pilot Limo, Primary Residential Mortgage, Realty 411 Magazine, Real Wealth Network, REIExpo.com, Rick and Leanne Rossiter, Southwest Riverside County Association of Realtors, Sonoka Corporation, Spinnaker Loans, UDirect IRA, Tony Alvarez, The Bottom Feeders, Tri-Emerald Financial Group, and WESTIN South Coast Plaza. See isurvivedrealestate.com for video of the live event and more on our sponsors.
We're going to introduce our next two speakers. I'll begin with Debra Still. Debra Still, CMB, is President and Chief Executive Officer of Pulte Mortgage, a nationwide lender that's headquartered in Inglewood, Colorado. The company employs 542 individuals throughout the United States, and since 1972 has helped more than 300,000 homebuyers finance their new home purchases. Debra recently served as chair of MBA's Residential Board of Governors and is member of the Association Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us again. And next we have Mark Palim as Vice President of Applied Economic and Housing Research at Fannie Mae. Mark is responsible for overseeing the economic and strategic research groups, forecasting functions, and manages multidisciplinary partnerships across the company to address specific business issues facing Fannie Mae. His work focuses on the impact of trends in financial service sector, on the economy, and on Fannie Mae. And he's been with us before, and we welcome you back too.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, Debra, I think everybody's really interested in hearing this. You have your 100-year bash coming in late October for Mortgage Bankers Association. What is the mood of the industry right now?
Yeah, the industry has come off a pretty good year, very much driven by refinances for a lot of lenders, and so it's been a good year. We're about 90 days away from implementing about 3,500 pages of Dodd-Frank rules. So you have a bit of tentativeness with readiness from lenders. Refinances are down about 70% in the last 60 days. So at a time when revenues are coming down, overheads driven by compliance are going up, and a whole lot of complexity. So I think you've got an industry that's feeling good, but a bit tentative going into the new year.
Okay. What changes have been made that concern you the most And are there changes yet to come that you really don't even know the full story on yet?
Yeah, so you've got, the challenge for Washington right now is to really thread the needle and get the perfect balance between consumer protection and broad access to credit. And we know that the credit markets right now are overly tight. We saw some of that data. FHA credit scores are averaging about 700. And so we've got an overly tight credit environment today. What happens in January when you get the complexity, mostly of the ability to repay rule? So the ability to repay rule is going to define who does and doesn't get loans for the next generation of consumers. And so we've got to get the rule right. The CFPB has, I think, done a good job and said that any loan that's sold to a government agency can be considered a qualified mortgage, and therefore there's a secondary market for that. And then they put a patch in place that said as long as you can sell a loan to the GSEs, Fannie or Freddie, while they're in conservatorship, you can consider that the definition of a qualified mortgage. Fannie and Freddie now only buy QM loans or qualified mortgages. So, you think about California, a high-priced market where you have a lot of jumbo buyers. Those loans aren't eligible in some cases to be sold to an FHA, VA, or the GSEs based on loan limits. So you've got a jumbo buyer. The maximum back ratio is now 43% as of January 10th. And we have a whole lot of very creditworthy jumbo buyers that exceed the 43%. So there's concern, certainly at the high-priced markets. You were talking about loan limits coming down. We get concerned as lenders that if loan limits come down, you're putting more folks in the jumbo space, so we'll depend on private capital. And right now, private capital is really only back in very small part, maybe 10% of the market, and only back for the wealthiest borrowers. So private capital hasn't historically provided broad access to credit for middle-class America, and we've got to be concerned about all those tensions as we move into January.
You would think that one of the considerations they have to have is that this industry can be a driver to GDP, which it really needs all the help it can get, and we're about to really do some changes that probably will reverse some very positive effects. And you gave one example. It's obvious refis are going to be not the biggest driver of income for maybe a very long time. Does that usually lend itself to more creativity in the non-government space? In other words, do you think you're going to see some lenders emerge with programs that kind of smack of risk, but they'll be able to pull it off because of the price aggression that's likely?
Yeah, so if you do a qualified mortgage and meet the definition of QM, you are in what's called a safe harbor, so you have maximum legal protections as a lender. If you are outside of the QM box, the penalties for not establishing appropriately the ability to repay for a borrower are very, very expensive. MBA's data would suggest if a lender were to make a loan and make about $4,000 on that loan and were to be challenged by the consumer in court, the penalties would be approximately $100,000. So, which is why lenders are going to make sure that at least initially they're lending in the safe harbor space rather than in this experimental space. And if we're going to be in the non-QM space, lenders will in all likelihood lend to the high end of the market, the wealthiest borrowers. Bruce, you were talking about the drivers of future housing demand, and the data that I look at suggests that about 60% of household formation between 2010 and 2020 come from two cohorts, the echo boom, which is about 5 million more individuals than their parents, the baby boomers, who drove housing in the 80s. And then you've got immigrant buyers. So about 60% of housing growth is going to come from the first-time home buyer. We will not get a sustainable housing recovery without that first-time buyer. And the big question that we have to ask, and Washington is asking, the administration and the CFPB are saying, do we have credit that will be available for those borrowers?
before I go to Mark, one last question. The attitude of the decision makers in regards to the final version of Dodd-Frank, is it punitive or is it constructive?
You know, I think the CFPB did a really good job of doing the best it can with the Dodd-Frank law, so with Congress's intent. We still have a lot of clarifications. The biggest challenge right now with the ability to pay rule is the definitions. QM says the borrower may not pay more than 3 points. But your definition of 3 points and my definition of 3 points is not the definition inside the QM rule. There's a portion of the mortgage insurance premium in there. There's a portion for affiliated businesses. The title fees go in there. And so it's a very complex calculation. So it's more complexity. But this rule, when it originally was published, was much more restrictive than it is today. So the CFPB has gotten us a long way down the road. Where they've stopped short is where they believe Congress had intended for something, and if you want a wider credit box, you need to go back to Congress.
Okay. So it really, and I guess one follow-up question, it's eased during the process of creating the law. Is it usually true that after something's established that there can be changes made to it that might be also more aggressive, or is that harder to do?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things. The CFPB has some authority, interpretive authority, and so we will be able to tweak over time as we understand the impact. MBA has been lobbying for some sensible changes to ensure broad access to credit. CFPB has pretty much said at this point we're done rule writing. We'll implement in January, we'll see the impacts, and then we'll consider what we need to do next. But if it was specified in the law, we're all going to have to go back to Congress and get Congress to change the law. And there are a whole lot of folks in Congress, particularly folks that were the architects of Dodd-Frank, that don't really want to open that box and allow that debate to then just totally wipe out the law.
Okay. And during the process of the last 3 years, because that's how long this has been, Mortgage Bankers Association and California Association or National Association, everybody's been lobbying for our industry and helping. I would think it would be hard for congressmen. I mean, today, a couple days ago, right before this, I decided to pull up some very recent amendments to Dodd-Frank, and one of them was 280-something pages, and the other one was 82. So for some light reading, I went home with 4 inches of. And then you realize that the bill's 2,800 pages, or 3,500 or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you realize that when you're sitting across from people in Congress, you could make the brightest suggestion in the world, and maybe nobody's home because they don't understand.
Yeah, it's, you think about from a lender perspective, so the ability to repay rule is, I think, 806 pages, and that's one rule. And trying to implement that complexity, the servicing rule is 1,200 pages long, and so the big concern now is if lenders aren't ready on January 10th, does all lending stop? And the good news is we do have the patch. We have the patch to the government agencies, so we know we can make those loans safely. It's everything else that we'll have to wait to see if private capital is interested in playing in that space.
Okay. Mark, thank you for your patience. I'm going to get to the report that you wrote. It's a short report, but the impact of rising interest rates on housing recovery and the history of that. But I guess I wanted to ask you about the refi programs. Have they benefited as far as the characteristic of people making payments on time? Have those improved in, say, 2012 and 2013 versus their, like the former efforts? And have price increases really help people, stick with the payment structure and make that a safer program?
So, in general, we've seen a decline in delinquency rate, and we've seen it for quarter after quarter. So our book is performing a lot better than it was a few years ago.
Right.
If someone gets a refi, that does help their monthly budget out, and should help the loan perform well over time.
And those programs have changed and morphed, and now there's programs where appraisals are not necessary, and they can get a refi over 100% loan to value. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure 100%
Okay.
about that one. But,
That's okay. That's okay. No, I know you're mostly in the Economist section. Well, let's talk about something you're very familiar with, and this is a concern of the group in this room because interest rates are going up. You know, we've had the luxury of some ridiculous rates, and we still have ridiculous rates as far as anything I'm used to. Just because they started with a 3 for the last year doesn't mean that that's anything normal. But now that interest rates going up, the thought is, okay, well, that's got to be damaging to price or volume of sales. So share with us a little bit about the research that you did and the time frames that those that covered.
Sure. So it stands to reason that people think if mortgage rates are rising, then you would expect house prices to drop. But it turns out, if you look at the historical record, that isn't really the case. Generally speaking, interest rates rise when the economy is doing better, demand for lending goes up. But when the economy is doing better, employment's doing better, and people have higher incomes, so they can afford a larger payment. The exception you see to that is if you see a large increase in interest rates over a short period of time. And then in the 2 most recent instances we've had of that, what you've tended to see is a slowdown in sales, and prices have continued to appreciate, but not as fast as before. The other thing you've also seen is people will shift to ARMs for a couple of quarters. So you'll see the market share of ARMs going up. Now, this time around, we're not seeing as much of a shift to ARMs. One of the reasons is probably because of also the new underwriting rules that we were just talking about, where you have to underwrite to what the payment will be in the first 5 years. So that is slowing down the shift to ARMs. So far, we've seen a little bit of slowing in new family sales and pending sales, but the market so far has held up okay.
When rates shift, does it sometimes get people off of the fence? There's people been waiting for the interest rates to turn into 2%, but then it went up to 4%. At some point, maybe you're jarred into action, going, well, maybe it's going to get to 5% someday. Oh my goodness.
Right, and that's a great point you bring up, because one of the things we saw was, the 10-year rate went up to 2.90, and mortgage rates moved up between May and September. And then when the Fed didn't taper, you've seen both the 10-year rate and mortgage rates come down 25, 30 basis points. And in the MBA data on the applications, we have seen a little bit of a pickup in refi. But, setting that aside, refi volumes are down dramatically this year, because that's just very rate sensitive.
Sure, and people already have the rate of their dreams, What's going to be interesting, and this audience is very capable of this transaction I'm about to describe. We may buy somebody's property that has an existing loan with a very favorable interest rate, and we may want to keep it in place. And I know that's not the rules, but we're going to do it a lot, I can tell you that.
Well, it's funny, because that's where private capital is probably going to play a role in wraps and all sorts of creative stuff from the 80s. Okay,
so blended rates and things like that. Okay, very interesting. And they're ready to play that game with us a little bit?
There are a lot of rules for small creditors, so you're going to have to read the CFPB's 3,500 pages to decide whether you can play in that space.
I won't do that until Monday.
Get a good attorney.
Could I wait until Monday? That would be good. I've had my share of reading. What type of loans that used to be common aren't coming back?
Yeah, so the new rules, and we can already see, I'll talk about MBA's credit index, but we can already see some products that have been very popular in the past, and good products. Some of the products, the exotic products, should have gone away. Think pay option ARM. But you've got IOs, which are now prohibited in the QM definition. You've got balloon payments prohibited in the QM definition. You've got loans with more than, and this is for the high cost markets, loans with more than a 30-year amortization schedule prohibited in the QM definition. And so some otherwise good product will not be allowed if you're going to meet the definition of QM in a safe harbor. MBA just started a mortgage credit availability index in February, And just in February, it was the baseline, so we set it at 100 basis, or 100. Credit loosened up a little bit. We've been at about 111, and that's sort of the jumbo market coming back for wealthy borrowers recently. Well, it's starting to drop. It's down to about 107 because some of these products are disappearing. Just to give you a sense of context, if we were at the height of the housing bubble, that number would have been 800. So again, an indication of how overly tight the credit conditions are today.
The cap on fees, 3% over $100,000 and no dual compensation. Can you kind of explain that, and how different is that from what the mortgage industry is used to?
Yeah, so the definition of QM, one of the criteria is the borrower cannot pay more than 3 points, and we talked about the definition of what that constitutes. One of the things MBA would take exception to is if you're an affiliated business. Affiliated means mortgage and title. You have to add the points that the borrower pays, or the cost that the borrower pays to the lender and the title company together. So more loans will basically not meet the QM rule. The other thing that MBA would take exception to is if you are a broker, you must count the fees that are paid to the broker in addition to the lender. So the compensation paid from the lender to the broker is counted in the borrower's 3-point calculation. So it really puts a disparate impact on wholesale lending and the brokers.
What percentage of loans, let's say in 2013, wouldn't meet QM, do you think?
What I do know is that if you look at the data for basically loans that have gone into foreclosure, what percent would have been subprime versus Alt-A versus prime versus QM? They've looked at all of the data and suggested that QM will be slightly more conservative than what you and I would call a prime loan back in the day.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Do you have any data?
No, and there is some data out there. Different people put numbers out, but one of the problems with that question is that if something isn't QM, what's the consumer going to do next? Are they going to look at a house that's a little cheaper? Are they going to bring a little bit more cash to the transaction? So you can run numbers on people's originators can do this. We can look at our portfolio and say, of originations in year X, how many loans were over 43 DTI? And that's an interesting number, but to me what's even more interesting is how's the industry going to respond, and how are individuals going to respond when their lender says, listen, I can't get you into this $250,000 home. You got to put more down or look at a different house.
Yeah, if you look at the 3-point rule, though, there is definitely a negative impact to small loan amounts. And so in the business I'm in, where we do a lot of loans to active adults in the Del Webb business, you've got large down payments. And so you've got cost being associated on the title side with sales price. You've got fees being calculated into a low loan amount, and actually large down payments hurt the borrower. It's right. Almost an unintended consequence. These two things, the fees to brokers and the title affiliate, mortgage and title affiliate, these are two things that the CFPB will tell us we can't fix. We believe Congress intended the impact to affiliates, intended the impact to brokers. Go back to Congress.
If you create a loan that doesn't meet QM standards, what does that mean? That it's a portfolio loan? You're going to keep it?
In the short term, there are likely going to be portfolio lenders, credit unions, community banks, and maybe some of the large depositories that may choose to do good non-QM loans and put them in their portfolio. For those of us that are independent mortgage bankers that have to sell their loans, since the GSEs now will no longer buy anything but a QM loan, we will make those loans if private capital comes back and someone will buy them and there's a secondary mortgage market.
Okay, but outside of that, you won't?
Which is why we think it's going to take time to see, you all talked in an earlier panel about the uncertainty. I think private capital is going to wait and see what this regulation exactly does before it's back. I think that's the expectation.
How big of a change is 43% back end to, what you guys were used to in, I don't know, just pick another year. Is it much more restrictive, the back end?
If 43, if you take out FHA and you just maybe use the GSE, and you might have some data, but I think most of our calculations directionally, don't quote this number, would suggest that maybe 30% of all borrowers have back ratios in excess of 43%. So it's a big chunk. Now that temporary patch is going to solve that for a while the GSEs are in conservatorship. But if the GSEs were to come out of conservatorship, we'd have a concern for all conventional buyers. Right now, just jumbo buyers.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
I was just
please.
going to comment on that and say, just maybe so it's clear, just a little bit of inside baseball, DC regulatory stuff. But the way the rule was written is that CFPB said, here are the rules, but obviously everyone's concerned about unintended consequences. So if you sell your loan to Fannie, Freddie, or FHA, or VA, or the other government programs, and it meets their standard, then for some of these things like the back-end DTI, that's fine. It'll count as QM. And then it's really up to our regulator or FHA to decide where do they want to set the boundaries. So that is going to give the market at least time to see what the impact is of those rules and create some sort of safety valve for them. The number, the 30, is a little higher than I would have thought from the things I've seen, but it's definitely still going to have an impact. And part of what's going on, frankly, is credit was too easy. We had the boom and the bust because credit was too easy, and there was a need, for credit to get tightened up, and there was a need for practices that some consumers were subjected to get driven out of the market. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
So the pendulum swung way too easy and sort of swung maybe back to way too hard. But that's going to take some time?
Right, it's going to take some time. I mean, there's a couple of different things going on at the same time, right? You have a recession which kills off people's ability to save, to be able to demonstrate the income to qualify for the loan. You had the loss of equity, which means a lot of people are underwater. It makes intergenerational gifts for down payments harder. So, there's a bunch of different things that have hit the housing market beyond tightening credit. There's no doubt that credit is tighter if you look at the average FICO and you look at down payments seem to be less. There you've seen less tightening, but you look at the FICOs, it's clearly tightened. And that really comes from two places. Part of it is people like Fannie have tightened up their standards, but also the lenders have tightened up the standards that they place on top of the standards that we have. So our box in terms of FICO and LTV may be so large, and the actual deliveries we've gotten are concentrated at the higher end of the FICO. One thing we're watching for is to see, as the refi volume disappears and drops off, is more competition at retail going to lead lenders to use more of our box?
Yeah, I think, if you look at what has driven lender behavior over the last couple of years, certainly these rules haven't gone into effect yet. That's a new complexity. It's really been repurchases and the loans that have had to be bought back. And if you've been in this industry a long time, the average cost of a repurchase, 10, 15 years ago, might have been about $10,000, which was the disposition cost of the property. Or the loan, if it was current, would have been, not underwater. Now when you buy back a loan, the last couple of years, you're buying back a loan that's a couple $100,000 underwater. And so lenders have gotten very, very conservative, saying, I'm going to lend inside the credit box. I agree with you, Mark, that refinance is loosening up. Will possibly cause lenders to consider lending to the full credit spectrum of FHA and the GSEs, absent now this new environment here first quarter of next year.
Debra, you had mentioned if Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, they stay in conservatorship. I kind of get the feeling that decision's a long ways away. Do you think it's closer than 5 years?
No, not. I think the debate has started. Well, the debate has definitely started.
Right.
You've got, a bill in the House, the Hensarling bill, the PATH Act, and then you've got the Corker-Warner in the Senate.
I actually read that. That's really exciting.
Which are two ends of the spectrum. So you've got the debate that's going on. You've got proposals coming out, from the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee here probably in the near term. So the debate is very active. The ultimate resolution, I think folks would talk about 5-7 years being the short end of the time horizon.
And from my perspective, all I'd say is that it's been really interesting to watch the way GSE reform debate has gone the last couple of years. We started out with, generally more academic plans that sort of were in an ideal state. What would you want the U.S. housing finance system to look like? Or clearly partisan plans. And now this spring and summer, you've really had the beginning of a discussion around by policymakers, economists, and others on the Hill of what are some of the practicalities of a transition? I don't think anybody is happy with the idea that 90% of mortgages are being, backstopped by the federal government, either through its government programs or through the GSEs. But if you wanted to get to 50, forget getting to 0, if you just want to get to 50, how can you do that? And what would practically involve? What does it mean to bring in private capital? How much private capital do you really need? How can you make sure it stays rather than just comes in when times are good and disappears? So, and that's one thing where I really think it's been a positive development in terms of the level of detail and the substance of the discussion.
Well, and I think, I think at the beginning it was like private capital could fund the marketplace, and there's statistics that would suggest since 1955 private capital has never played much more than about 35% of the funding for real estate. And so I think folks have started to acknowledge there is an appropriate role for government and housing. To your point, what's the percentage and what's the model of the future?
Right.
What's kind of interesting is we're about to implement a very restrictive new rule in the midst of the most profitable quarters in history for the lending industry, or for Fannie, Freddie, and FHA. And so is there any thought that maybe we've already done more than enough? And is there any chance of cooler heads prevailing saying, well, we don't have to do all this stuff? Or is it too late?
I don't know. There's a lot of wheels in motion. We talked about the 3,500 pages. That's about 7 rules. Then you've got QRM right behind it. You've got Respatila reform coming out in fourth quarter that'll probably be implemented, within the next year. You've got loan officer steering, which is another rule the CFPB is obligated to issue next year. There's HUD's disparate impact rule is still trying to be figured out right now. You've got another Basel for the banks. You've just got, all these wheels are already in motion.
Have you ever met anybody that's actually read all this stuff?
Yeah, half the MBA policy team, I think.
Okay. That's a tough assignment. We've run out of time. I'm going to ask one more question about servicing. Have there been significant changes to servicing loans, and particularly the policies if you don't make your payment, what is the responsibility now of the servicer and the lender?
The servicing rule is also part of the 6-7 rules that are coming out in January. That's the 1,200-page rule. And yeah, most of the servicing rule is patterned after the large servicing settlement for the large, the 5 largest servicers in the country that was done, about a year ago. It's very detailed in terms of contact timeframes, processes, cycle times, notifications to the consumer. and will basically guide a servicer to follow certain steps all the way from the first payment to, if in fact loss mitigation and ultimately foreclosure would be necessary.
Is the lender forced to do loss mitigation as far as, well, they go through the process, but they're not forced to say yes, is that correct?
They have to go through an appropriate process.
Right, but they can decide, no, I'll just take back the asset?
Yes, there's an analysis that now has to be performed, both for the best interest of the consumer and obviously the financial obligations of the servicer.
Okay, but ultimately the person that put the money out, can they decide, I don't want to do loan modification, I just want to go get the asset since you didn't pay me? Is that allowed? Not sure? I mean, because that would be, the unintended consequence of that would be, wait a minute, I thought that was okay, and all of a sudden now it's not. That would be a big deal to me.
I would summarize it by saying the appropriate process has to be examined, and it's a very detailed process, and very much the consumer must be informed and involved through the entire process.
Okay, but the lender probably still has some choices. Okay. All right, I found that really a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. This is kind of a fun segment because we'll probably get some interaction, which will be fun. And I'm here to protect either side from each other. No. I wanted to ask, probably the first question, what most surprised you about the last year? I guess let's start with John. If you look back a year ago, what you thought was going to occur and what did occur, what was the biggest surprise for you?
I'm going to throw out a compliment here at the same time, Bruce. You and I had a discussion in December when you told me home prices were going to go up 20% in the Inland Empire last year, and I said, no way. And you nailed it. So I would say that was probably my biggest surprise, and you got it right once again. So.
Well, I appreciate that. So price aggression was a surprise. Okay. Leslie, what about you?
I've never really heard it called price aggression
Well,
before. It's like price appreciation.
When it goes 20% or more, it's aggression.
Aggression, okay. Well, I'm going to actually go back 2 years and say I think the lesson that I keep relearning over and over again is that markets really do change on a dime. And when you forecast forward, it's typically a gradual trend or you do kind of a scenario thing. But the big changes that happen are really hard to forecast. And when I look backwards at the market, in February of 2012, it changed. And I don't know exactly what happened, but when you look at the data starting in March, that's when the home price appreciation really started to take off. Inventory was below where it was a year ago. And to me, inventory is really the best leading indicator of what's going to happen in the housing, existing single-family housing market. But that's really what always surprises me, is just how quickly markets can change for really no apparent reason sometimes. I mean, it's like animal spirits.
Well, we'll probably talk on that because I'm a big believer and that's a very important factor that's a little hard to quantify, but I'm susceptible. That's why I like charts. It prevents me from acting on how I feel a lot. Christopher, what about you? Probably nothing surprised you, right?
A couple things. To Leslie's point, inventories are the leading indicator, and what's amazing is how we manage to forget that constantly, because the cards were there for us to see. I mean, the inventory was dropping. You get below a certain level, you're going to have bidding wars. Simple as that, and that sort of drove the show. I wasn't surprised by the last year. I think the year before is when you really started to see it. And that it really caught me by surprise when all of a sudden you started getting wind of these sort of bidding wars going on. You went, well, that's not supposed to happen anymore.
To be honest with you, one of the advantages we have is we're selling properties. So Greg, my oldest son, is buying 120 properties a year, and then gradually through 2012 we noticed the transition of we put it in the MLS and have all the time in the world to fix it, and then somebody would eventually buy it. And we got to the fourth quarter of 2012 and we didn't have to fix anything, and we could sell it multiple offers, and even had a clause in the listing saying that the appraisal will no longer determine the sale price because you've aggressively bid up the property beyond its capacity to appraise, and people still bought it. So that's what forces you to go backwards and say, okay, what I thought mattered didn't happen, so what trumps that? And it was, there's nothing for sale.
Yeah, inventories, always got to watch that. That was a big surprise to me. And the other thing is maybe it's not so much of a surprise, but maybe more of a comment. We're all celebrating the fact that prices are going up, but on the other hand, if you want to talk about California's economy overall, the single largest problem we have, housing's too expensive.
Housing's too expensive?
Way too expensive. And from you look at the state and who's leaving the state, and it's middle income folks who can't afford a house here, and it's emptying things out, and we wonder why our factories can't get qualified workers, but we have so many people on the various sorts of social programs, and you can look right at those housing prices. So be careful what you wish for.
Okay. Now, well, I got to think about that one. We just came off of 50% affordability, and that number had never been broached in California since 70s. So
it's never been broached in Texas in the other direction.
Yeah, but price aggression there is zero, and always.
What's with this aggression?
Well, I'm an investor. I'd like something to go up. I'll change that if it makes you happy. But what's interesting about that, okay, and I'll just stop there for just a second. See, the rules don't make, they're not always the same. So you could go to Texas and say, okay, do you have migration of businesses? Yes. Do you have migration of people? Yes. You put that formula in California, you have price increases. In Texas, you got nothing, because there's another 100 acres somebody can drive to.
If you look at the history of the last decade of population growth and that migration, what's amazing is we had a completely reverse pattern of flows. If you go back into the 90s when everything got bad, unemployment went up, people left the state because unemployment here was lousy, everywhere in the nation was better,
right.
And you saw that out-migration.
Right.
This time around, the out-migration peaked in 2005 when our economy was on fire, because home prices are so high.
No, because
people sold
their fortune and bought a Texas house free and clear.
Perhaps that too, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
The point is people were leaving at a very rapid pace. And then, of course, when prices dropped down, or reversed, and people actually started coming back in despite our bad economy. So the pressures of housing costs in California are enormous. And you're going to see on the other side of the equation all sorts of new people pushing for regulations on affordable housing mandates and all sorts of new various social programs. You watch.
Bruce, maybe I can translate it a little bit. I think the affordability index is based on the median income household.
Right.
Last year's price appreciation was not driven by the median income household. It was driven by affluent households who live in California and foreigners. And that entry-level buyer, which is kind of the median income household or maybe a little bit below, was not present. And so we do a lot of work all over the country, and I know Debra does too. We go to Texas and they talk about, why are you sending so many people here? I mean, seriously. You see all the California license plates. There is a big out-migration that is going on, and I think that, $70,000, you can't afford a $400,000 home. You can't.
Okay, I'll think about that one. We'll come back to that. Now, Sean taught me something years ago, and it's always hard to hear something you go, I really don't like that, but sometimes two charts can look like they work together just because, like you have people migrating out in 2006, it's naturally because they can't afford it. Well, maybe they just cashed a $400,000 check and they can buy 2 Texas houses, and that's why they left. I mean, it might not be because they couldn't afford it, it's because they made so much money.
Nobody wants to move to Texas.
Well, that's why they'll probably come back. Okay. Sean, the surprise for you for last year?
I'm still struggling with this inventory as a predictor, because inventory bottomed at the end of 2005 when you and I were getting out of the market. So inventory as a predictor, I'm not so excited about. The big surprise for me this year was the whole taper, fumble, interest rate bump thing. I really didn't think we'd see any big move in interest rates till 2015.
And you feel like we've had a big move in interest rates?
Well, I mean, clearly they're still historically low, but I think it's
you and I know that personally, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, take that median income buyer in California. They can now afford, 10% less than they could 60 days ago. And for that person, the median income price in 2000, you take the median income in household income in the state in 2000,
right.
You qualify them using the calculators over at Fannie Mae, and the median price is $250. That was our price. Go to the peak, 2007, using a pay option arm, take that median income household, they can now pay $550,000. Our median price, $550,000. Today, take that median income of $62,000, put it into their thing, $360,000, $350,000 is what they can afford, and that's where we pegged the median at.
Well, wait a minute. But
buyers have always bought
what lenders will let them.
What lenders will lend them. That's how they buy houses. With the median price we show based on public records is
400.
lower. No, we're at 355.
Oh, okay. So you think it's over?
I don't think it's over. I think it all really comes down to what happens with lending.
Okay.
Right?
Do people, and I don't really know the answer to this completely, but a repeat buyer, don't they bring in a large percentage of their equity to their next purchase to where that loan just doesn't change? So that's part of the statistic that, we keep on moving that equity around.
Well, we're doing things right now in lending, and I'll turn this over to Deb, but we've never done before. When we talk about, oh my gosh, we finally got rid of the pay option arm, it's such a terrible loan program. It's been around since the 70s. And it was a great loan program because if you got in trouble, you could make a lower payment. The difference between the 70s and what happened in 2005 at the peak is you used to get qualified based on the worst payment. Now they're qualifying you based on this, teaser rate pay option arm payment. Nothing wrong with the loan product. There's only wrong with how we qualified people for it. And yet we're going to throw it out the window. And we're doing this across the board with, looking at what happened historically, but without putting it in any frame of reference. What happens next year, I think, is anybody's guess. We're doing all kinds of stuff. We have no idea what the implications of it are.
Well, the other difference is 20 years ago, you weren't doing cash out refis like you did. And I think that's one of the things that people never talk about, and I'd love for Deb to weigh in, but I think the financial crisis would have been a third to a half less severe if you hadn't had this my home is a piggy bank thing going on for 3 or 4 years, because the subprime share in California, I think at the peak was like 12% of the market. I mean, and again, it was all the CDOs and all the stuff going on all over in the financial markets. But just that whole phenomena of cashing out and taking money out of your home put so many people into harm's way when prices started to go down. And you didn't have the same kind of domino effect in earlier cycles because people had a nest egg.
So.
No, I'm not buying that, Leslie. No, I'm going to agree with him. It was all collapsing credit standards. Look, you shouldn't be able to pull money out of your home. You can't pay it back. So it goes back to the idea that there was a lack of credit standards. It still boils down.
That's just semantics. I'm just saying that there was a time when the equity in your home was not a flexible part of your financial portfolio, right? It was the money that was in your home. And what happened is it became easy to get at, and that's what people did.
Did that help the economy, though, too? As far as, mortgage equity withdrawal?
Not ours, Chinese economy. Well, no, because remember when all that was happening, we as a nation opened up this 6% of GDP trade deficit. I'm not being coy, I'm being very honest there. The fiscal value of that did not accrue to our nation.
It helped Bruce Norris's household accessing. Well, it really did. I mean, we could access. I didn't have to pay points for that. It was a cheap interest rate. I didn't have to pay a payment until I had a use for it. If I found a deal on a house, I could write a check. fix it up, sell it, pay the line back. I mean, how many guys in here, women, everybody's done that? Oh, come on, that's
There's a
it?
difference between that, though, and buying an RV or a
Well,
car.
yeah,
or a boat.
but I don't think I want the whole industry to restrict my access because
But
somebody
Bruce,
abuses
you
it.
can take money out of your home, and you can, as long as you can pay that money back, it's fine. You're right.
Right.
The problem was they were giving people home equity lines of credit that were larger than they had the ability to pay back.
Sure.
And that's the problem.
And the point is, it ought to be priced differently in the market, and it's not.
Well, that was,
Price, yeah.
that definitely, you know, we were doing a couple things. I agree with you. Originally,
Hey, you got someone to finally agree with you.
no, it's like the loan programs were morally innocent if used for the right buyer, and you're describing a very sophisticated buyer. If you think about, you know, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Dodd-Frank, consumer protection, the ultimate change in dynamics is that Congress and the CFPB do not believe consumers will behave rationally in an irrational environment, whether it's affordability or price appreciation. And so consumers need to be protected, and we will certainly see whether, you know, it used to be as long as I disclosed properly, I would give a borrower a loan, and now there is obligations that the lending community will own to make sure, and I think it's also about layered risk. I mean, pay option arms are fine with maybe a down payment and a high credit score and what, you know, but zero down, low credit scores, high back ratios, and a program that gives maybe too many options in the
Or just
moment.
the back ratio based on the teaser payment.
Yeah, there's a right way to underwrite all of this. So anyway, so surprise. Probably would have said the price appreciation in the sand states, but I'll pick a different one. And I am generally surprised. There's been a couple of studies. The Research Institute for Housing in America, I believe Harvard did one, the Joint Center, and then I think Fannie Mae did one. The surveys that suggest that like 85–90% of America still wants to buy or still wants to own, that the fact that we have that appetite for homeownership after what we've been through is still a pleasant surprise.
So people have hit on a lot of themes that were a little bit of a surprise. I just wanted to add to the other conversation we've been having. There's an aspect of this too. There was a change in the institutional structure of mortgage and originations. So if you go back to the S&L age, people held things in portfolio. That does make you behave a little differently. And you did have originate to sell, but people were originating FHA loans, and Ginny got going. At some point in the 90s, you had commercial banks start to buy in the late 90s, subprime lenders, and behavior started to change. And by the time you got to the mid-2000s, you had the layering of risk that clearly is an important part of why loans failed. You know, if subprime's an old product. If you're doing subprime with a 60 LTV in a state where you can foreclose in 6 months, yeah, the lender's not taking a lot of risk, right? If you're doing low doc for someone who made $1 million last year, but they own a business and the paperwork around that is not great because they're managing their tax situation, that's probably a pretty, and they got a 50 LTV, that's one kind of loan. You're doing low doc for somebody who clearly has got a very middle income job, and the broker's adding a zero or moving a decimal place on their income on a stated loan. That's a totally different type of product. So I just think it was a gradual thing. Cash out refis were part of it, the layering of risk were part of it, the ability to offload it, and lending institutions were focused on making quarterly earnings and fee income rather than holding the loan for a long time. There are a lot of different things that went into it.
I'm just curious, you know, all these loan programs we're talking about, you know, if you weren't in the industry or you didn't borrow money, which I remember there was a time in 2005, or maybe it was a little bit before, decided to pay off everything. And so all the nuttiness in the loan programs, I just didn't know what was happening because I didn't call up a lender and say, can I borrow money? And they would go, of course, you don't have to send in anything. I didn't know that was happening. I barely knew what a mortgage-backed security was, and then when all this hit the fan, some of the reports that I wrote, I said, prices are going to go down, but I didn't even know what a collateralized debt obligation was. It wasn't until later when I read that stuff, I said, you got to be kidding me. That's how we did it. And so I guess my question in a roundabout way was, are the buyers of that type of product ever going to show up again in sufficient quantity? I mean, or have we burned that bridge where that isn't coming back? That's partly what I'm concerned about going forward.
There's already some signs. I've heard some talk. I haven't seen many numbers, but the asset-backed, collateralized, what do you want to call the damn things?
Debt obligations.
Debt obligations, yeah. They're coming back in the commercial space a little bit, but they're much more transparent. Look, there is a value to these things from a liquidity standpoint. You get that from an economist. If you have one big loan with one big building, you got no flexibility. You can't get rid of some of that debt when you need to, if you need cash for something, and so if you have these in tradable securities, it makes sense. What the problem here was that there was a whole other second issue with the fact that nobody was watching anybody. The regulators were completely asleep. The rating agencies were a joke. And all those things need to be kind of brought back into some, if the forces are that make sure things are good and they do their job, there's no reason yet again this shouldn't be part of the equation.
Okay. You think that's...
Yeah, I think you said the one word, transparency. I think investors will protect themselves in the future, and there'll be standards for transparency, so you know what you're buying.
Yeah. And I lied a couple of things. One is if you look back at that period, complexity, opacity, those things were not the friend of the investor or the borrower or half the people involved in the middle. And I think you can look at the corporate market for an interesting analogy, right? In the 1980s, we had the junk bond boom, and then that crashed. Corporate America took on a huge amount of debt. Since then, corporate balance sheets are actually in great shape. Piles of cash, low debt levels. You do still have what are junk bonds. It's just there's nothing like the volume there was. The covenants are better. It's not
actually,
being
they're getting worse again.
though.
You hear about this? Actually, they're starting to slide the other way. So you might see some of those same old mistakes creeping back into the system.
Right, and you have a cycle. Things happen, but to me, what's interesting about this last cycle is you've seen in the 2000s, the households is where debt got out of hand. We had a massive run-up. That sort of ended except for student loans. That's the one area that's growing. But now we've shifted to our economy being dependent on a large increase in government debt.
I'm going to take a little issue with
the
that.
next part of the cycle.
If you look at the Federal Reserve's financial obligation ratio, which is an estimate of the percent of household income being used to service financial obligations, there wasn't a big problem with debt in the 2000s. It wasn't, because the financial obligation ratio, which was well over 12% in the 80s, got up to about 14%. You're talking a percentage point and a half higher. It's nothing because of the big decline in interest rates, which goes back to what has already been said. The problem in all those loan portfolios was not how much people were borrowing, but who was being able to borrow it. That's the primary problem, dead on, no doubt about it.
Right. I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that the monthly payment capacity, which is what that measures, low interest rates disguise how much debt there was. If you look at the amount of equity people had in their homes, and this goes to the cash out, refi, and debt consolidation, the equity that people had in their homes diminished dramatically during that time period.
When prices went down, not when prices are going up. It stayed steady when prices are going up.
And the amount of debt people loaded up on was just large amounts of
I want
debt.
to take issue with this idea that it's who we loan to, right? So, I mean, at the peak.
Actually, I was supporting you.
No, I know, but I just, thank you, Chris, but.
That's a first.
Really? I was going to say, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, fair enough. But I think there's one really important point which gets lost in all this, the whole conversation's become about the qualification of the borrower and do we make the loans to the right people or whatever. And I don't think it has anything at all to do with the folks that borrowed. I think it has to do the price at which they borrowed at. So for example, if we tied loan limits to 7% return on rents and we never loaned above that,
I knew
right?
you were going to get to this.
Yeah, I mean, We made pulse loans when there was a 1.5% return on lend. So anybody with a pulse, we'd lend them the money, and that was clearly a problem, no question, right, to your point. But at the bottom, right, a year and a half ago, with prices having gone up so much, we could have made loans to homeless folks with no income or anything else, right, and there'd be zero losses today.
Because we could have taken them over subject
Just
to.
take them back.
No, we could take them over.
But still, there'd be no losses. The losses because the prices were unsupportable based on incomes.
I would say price appreciation trumps solid underwriting every time, but now I'm going to say price aggression trumps solid underwriting every time because everybody makes out okay regardless.
But even if we appreciated zero from last year.
But as a lender, how do you make a loan and know you're going to get price appreciation endlessly from now till doomsday?
But there are some basic fundamentals. I mean, it was pretty clear from a historical standpoint that prices were getting a little distended.
Chris has a newsletter.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'll read it.
But I come back to rents, right? So unless you get into a period of time where rents are declining dramatically, and where has that really happened? Maybe Detroit, but you know, I don't. Where do you get declining rents and not Detroit recently?
And by the way, your argument for continued price appreciation in the state is made best by looking at the rent-to-price costs here in the state. It's still rents are still incredibly high relative to home ownership. And that says that there's a demand to be here one way or the other, and that's going to translate into higher home costs. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be another close to 20% a year. I think it's just, well, all guns forward, I think the interest rates will be nothing.
Well, this is what makes no sense to me. In 2005, you could get a loan with no pulse, maybe a little pulse. I mean, you could just, they would lend to anyone at the top of the market, and we all knew it was the top of the market. At the bottom of the market, like, nobody can get a loan. Like, what is going on here? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this group in here is called investors, and we have a really hard time getting loans to this day. And our balance sheets can look really good. I remember somebody in this audience went to a lender who he had been using during, let's say, 05 and 06 with a credit line. And he took a couple of years off. He sold his portfolio and made lots of money, had millions of dollars in the bank, took a couple of years off, went to the area that he really majored in, crashed really hard. So stuff that was 300 is now 60 grand. So he says, well, I guess I'll get out of bed and do some of this stuff. So he goes back to the lender and he said, well, we haven't had any income for 2 years. So he's got 7 figures times a whole bunch of multiples, can't loan to him. He says, you got to fix your monthly income. Okay, so he goes and buys 30 free and clear houses, comes back to the lender and goes, well, you don't have it on your 2 years tax returns. So we've made him loans at 9.9%. And that's frustrating in the sense because, you know, it's not sometimes about who to loan to. It's like this room doesn't fit whatever they think is safe, but it's really not true. Is there any future that in the saying, well, investors actually are a pretty good risk, we'll loan them more money? I'm just curious.
You know, clearly the pendulum swung too far, and I think we'd all agree that credit is overly tight. I think we will probably find the right balance again. It's taking probably a lot longer than we might suspect, but again, I think one of the things lenders will ask for is clear reps and warrants from the investors that they sell their loans to. So whether it's the GSEs or FHA, tell me the definition of materiality, tell me the definition of duration, how long does a borrower have to pay before it's a good loan, and I won't see it back in 5-7 years. So clear reps and warrants is probably, for me, one of the most important things we can do in the short term to get lenders lending again to
Not
the full
everybody's
credit
going
box.
to understand that term, so what do you mean by reps and warrants?
When you sell a loan to the GSEs, I'll use it as an example, you rep and warrant certain things and that it meets basically Fannie or Freddie's underwriting guidelines. Over the past 5 years, lenders have been in a position where we've had lenders defending the definition of a guideline versus, well, that was a guideline versus a technical default. And so it's been a bit of an environment where lenders have learned, well, I'm never going to do that again. So credit has gotten tighter and tighter. We are almost through the legacy book of business. FHFA has suggested that we all be through the legacy book, so anything prior to conservatorship, which is prior to 2008, we need to clean up and get done by the end of this year. I think that's going to be huge. And then FHFA, who's the regulator over Fannie and Freddie, has given us a little bit of definition around reps and warrants, but what lenders want is, tell me the definition of materiality. When is it material that I truly, versus a technical foot fault? And that's still some clarity that lenders are looking for.
Okay. Biggest concern for your industry in the next year? Building or hedge funds or whatever, or both?
The biggest concern is always the economy, but it seems to be going along okay. The biggest concern my clients have is the price that they're paying for land right now because of the imbalance. I think the one thing that's not getting said up here I wanted to throw in though is I don't think we do a good enough job in this audience putting your lender hat on and really understanding what it's like to be a lender and to have to deal with putbacks of loans you made to very good people where you dotted every I and crossed every T and you still lost $200,000, and all the lawsuits you've had to deal with while they're telling you loosen credit, loosen credit. By the way, I'm suing you for billions of dollars for all the credit that you did. I mean, they're balancing both. And then the last piece I wanted to throw on that piece too is Dodd-Frank. I understand if the loan is underwritten improperly and gets sold, the buyer of the loan will then be liable. So there is no appetite to buy your security from the bank because BlackRock and PIMCO are not going to take that risk. It's stupid. So as soon as they get rid of that, then there is a huge appetite right now for 4.5% to 5% interest rates backed by assets that are rising in value. There's a huge appetite for that. And that's really the only thing I think they need to fix to get credit flowing again.
Okay. Leslie, your biggest concern for?
Really jobs. You know, I think a sustained improvement in housing is going to take a lot stronger job growth than we have right now. And, you know, you've got structural issues, you've got cyclical issues, and yes, things are improving, but you look at and I'm not good with numbers tonight, but there's a lot of people on disability that aren't getting counted in unemployment. When you look at, you know, African American teenagers and white males over the age of 55 and these niches, the unemployment rate is very, very high. And again, it kind of circles back to this whole thing about where the first-time home buyer is going to come from, and they're not going to come from anywhere if they're not able to move out from their parents' house because they can't get a job with decent income. So I think I really worry about the fundamentals. I worry about income distribution and how skewed it's getting. I worry about social unrest. I mean, there's just so many things to worry about, really. It's hard to pick just one.
Christopher, what about yourself? For the economy or for, you know, a specific industry?
Yeah, how about I go for nation and state? My worry for the nation is the ability for Congress to do so much harm to our economy. I'm worried that the uncertainty they began is just going to carry over into another big mess, February mess. Again, too many people pursuing ideological agendas and not paying attention to the pragmatic realities on the ground, and it scares me to death that we have these kind of folks leading us. We live in a two-party, one-party state for all intent and purposes, and that worries me. State level, I'm going to go back to those high housing costs. Again, this is a state that desperately needs to increase the supply of housing relative to its population and population growth. We have a lot of social issues over this. Again, there's economic issues because of this particular problem. For those of us who can afford these expensive homes, you know, great for us, but the overall health of the economy is dependent on having an appropriate amount of housing, and that goes back to CEQA. I mean, this disaster in this state, I just hate that law. It's the most ridiculous thing, and the so-called CEQA reform almost made the situation worse.
What's CEQA?
California Environmental Quality Act. This is the tool by which unions and lawyers get to hold up every home builder in the state and take off a 20% off at the top. But it's it's a little thing. It's ridiculous, and our so-called. I'm really tired. Our so-called.
Well, most of our fun is in the last half hour. It's all right.
Yeah. Our CEQA reform, and on top of the environmental thing, I mean, at the last minute when they were doing our so-called CEQA reform, they tried to slip in another provision into the bill. I don't know if you caught this. It was going to be on top of your environmental impact report, you were going to have to do a social justice impact report. And thankfully, it was a midnight thing. I don't know who slipped it in. They did it at 11:45. It was one of these kind of things. Every chamber in the state went crazy. They had it off with the pass. But we still, but that's the kind of stuff that's going on right now. And again, these same people who support CEQA are the same people who want to put affordable housing mandates on all new construction, and it goes on and on and on. You can't do this.
So that's why California builders moved to Houston?
No, they want to build here because, candidly, if you can get the permit, it's hugely profitable.
Okay.
I mean, in a very real sense, let me be conspiratorial. The big builders may not want to change it because the margins they get in the business they do get here is actually quite increased as a result of this.
The margin all goes to the landowner.
Okay, then the landowners want it.
Right.
And the city that collects the building fees, apparently. Okay. All right, Sean, biggest concern?
I think my biggest concern definitely is just the regulatory swing too far. So I'd follow up on kind of what Chris was saying.
You guys going to agree again?
Yeah, no, I actually have agreed with a lot of what Chris has to say tonight.
Well, I have to take issue with that.
Okay, perfect. And I think just a lack of political, leadership there. The thought that we can increase affordable housing by adding taxes to housing just seems so nonsensical to me. But that literally is, what we believe. We can add fees to housing to fund affordable housing, and it just. And that's the political environment we're in right now, that, we can tighten credit to improve lending. Nothing makes sense anymore.
We'll do 3 good loans a year.
4 years ago, we had all the affordable housing we wanted.
Yeah.
We didn't have to do a thing.
And it was a huge problem, and we needed to fix it. And so let's withhold all that inventory and keep anybody from buying it, push prices back up.
Right.
And then, we can, because really affordable housing, I think, in our political environment is not about helping people afford homes. It's about helping a handful of folks that build affordable housing or that benefit from running affordable housing programs that happen to be well affiliated, right, to make some money. And that's maybe an overly cynical view, but I think we're at that point.
I like cynical views.
There's been a lot of head shaking going on, by the way. There's been a lot of agreement in what's being said. Deb?
So I think 3 things that intersect. One, I would worry about broad access to credit for qualified consumers. I worry about a competitive marketplace. If you think that competition is good for consumers, how many lenders with this complexity of the regulatory environment are going to throw in the towel and be done? And then, the notion that housing is critical to our economy, and are we going to derail our housing recovery?
Jobs is clearly the number one worry, and that gets me to sort of my number 2 worry, which is that we haven't discussed a lot, which is what goes on in the rest of the world. In the early stage of this recovery, exports were a big part of rebuilding employment in the U.S. And, there's still all sorts of problems in Europe with the euro, the Middle East. There's China slowing, and all those things. We're just a much more trade-dependent economy with very low sort of domestic innate growth for the moment. I worry about a negative shock from outside the U.S.
There's a couple of things that we're used to having. that we think are always going to be there. 30-year fixed mortgage, deductible interest on taxes. I'm just curious about everybody's opinion about those holy grails. Are they going to stick around for the duration?
I want to take the second one.
Go right ahead.
Because there's two economists here, and I presume you have the same views. Well, maybe you don't. I'm not sure. Actually, we shouldn't ask you.
I'll go hide then.
Yeah, no, only because I don't want to put you in any compromising position. You know, the one thing that every economist, left wing, right wing, you ask any of them and they will tell you the homeowner interest deduction is a travesty. It's a ridiculous subsidy of housing. It distorts capital markets in every way. The only people who benefited from it were the people who own homes when it was put into place, because ever since then we're all paying higher prices because more or less we have subsidized interest rates. It's a crazy thing to put in place. You should get rid of it. It will never be gotten rid of. It is fixed in stone. It will never go away, period.
They don't know whether to applaud you or throw tomatoes at you.
No, it's true. I'm sorry. It's true. It is, you cannot justify it. There's not one logical model out there why that thing should be in place.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different spin on it. We did a white paper on it, and people forget that the standard itemized deduction for a couple is $12,000. So 70% of the people who buy homes today don't even use the mortgage interest deduction because it doesn't add up to the $12,000 bucks. All of the benefit accrues to 5 states. This is one of it. And there already has been some movement there. North Carolina did it to drop the dollar amount. So I do think you could see maybe the dollar amount go down. It's not a budget saver because it's I think $55 billion a year or something like that. All of it. I mean, everyone in this room uses it, but we're really the minority.
Well, I think the thing, you could see second homes hit, or you could see that $1 million cap go down. I think the more interesting issue, kind of philosophically, is what do we believe about the government's role in housing? Do we believe that it should be subsidized in some way? And I clearly can never disagree with Chris here, because from an economist's point of view, there are more efficient ways to subsidize home ownership than the mortgage interest deduction. All that being said, it's been around for an awfully long time, and changing it when the housing sector is one of the strongest parts of the economy right now is probably not a good thing. I mean, I can give you a zillion reasons why you shouldn't touch it, but theoretically you can do it better other ways. But really, what should the role of government be? And I think with respect to the GSEs, it really does boil down to that, right? I mean, that's one of the, when you look at a new structure, I mean, private capital is waiting on the sidelines to come in at a huge spread. So it's not an issue of, it's really the price at which that would happen.
But they want a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. The appetite of bond funds to buy 30-year fixed rate mortgages is huge, and that's why that's not going to go away either.
It's huge. They want to buy 30-year fixed.
How many trillions of dollars PIMCO manages $2 trillion of bonds, I think, themselves. I mean, they're looking for more things to buy, and if you're running a bond fund and can get a 4.5% coupon, that's a pretty nice return right now. So I think there's a huge appetite for that. Not the banks. The banks should not hold it on their balance sheet. That's a death knell. But to offload it into the bond market, I think is
I think it's interesting your comment on private capital is waiting in the sidelines. I agree. If they're coming back with a big spread and a bigger yield. But I would also tell you the GSEs or FHFA have been raising G fees, the guarantee fees. We've had, some lenders have had 7, 8 G fee increases in the last 18 months. If you look at the G fees that we are paying, ultimately our consumers are paying for the credit quality we're doing right now, it's way outsized. And the purpose was to crowd in private capital, and private capital's not back yet, so it's not working.
Didn't the rate on the jumbo drop below the rate on the 30-year?
Yes.
And that would tend to suggest that what you say is right, that there's a lot of capital sitting out there. Because if you can get a jumbo at a lower rate than a Fannie or Freddie.
And the G
but
fees
you look at what private capital is lending. They're lending, 15, 20% down, 780 credit scores. It is for the wealthiest borrowers. It is not for middle class America.
Yeah, and G fees and increased interest at risk, because they now know they have increased risk, will increase the spread over treasuries. So what, we're going to have a 5% interest rate? I mean, that's still a great rate. You include it in the rate and you move on.
Well, that makes housing even more unaffordable in California, so woe is a... I've got a question about that statement. Affordability, does that, I mean, that kind of tells you where you are historically. We're at 36%. It's been like in the 90s when we had that downturn, we got up to 39 or 40. That was max. We get down to 17 normally, so we're nowhere close to where we were. So how are we on a, okay, there's a lot of headroom for price to go up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said everybody's leaving because it's not affordable.
Did I say everyone?
I thought you did.
I never said anything closer. I said there's a segment in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, nice try.
Nice try. All right. Guys, it's been really fun. I've really enjoyed this panel. I knew I would. Thank you very much. And thank you for your support, and we had a great night. I really enjoyed everything that went on tonight, and we'll do it again next year. All right, thank you guys very much. Thank you. Okay.
This event could not have been possible without the generous help of the following Platinum partners: PropertyRadar and Sean O'Toole, Housing Wire, the Apartment Owners Association, the San Diego Creative Real Estate Investors Association and President Bill Tan, Investors Workshops and Sean Watkins, Angel Bronzegeist and Sarah Benora, Invest Club for Women and Iris Veneration and Bobby Alexander, San Jose Real Estate Investors Association and Geraldine Barry, MVT Productions, Rhoda Construction, Wilson Investment Properties, and White House Catering. For event video and information, visit isurvivedrealestate.com. The Norris Group would like to thank its gold sponsors for supporting I Survived Real Estate: Adrenaline Athletics, Claudia Buys Houses, Coldwell Banker Town & Country, Elite Auctions, Phoebe, for investors by investors, Home Vestors, In a Day Development, Inland Empire Investors Forum, Inland Valley Association of Realtors, Investor Experts, Inc., John Merrill Investments, Inc., Keystone CPA, Las Brisas Escrow, Lavis Associates, Northern California Real Estate Investors Association, Northern San Diego Real Estate Investors Association, Orange County Real Estate Investors Association, Orange County Investment Club Phoebe, Personal Real Estate Magazine, Pilot Limo, Primary Residential Mortgage, Realty 411 Magazine, Real Wealth Network, REIExpo.com, Rick and Leanne Rossiter, Southwest Riverside County Association of Realtors, Sonoka Corporation, Spinnaker Loans, UDirect IRA, Tony Alvarez, The Bottom Feeders, Tri-Emerald Financial Group, and WESTIN South Coast Plaza. See isurvivedrealestate.com for video of the live event and more on our sponsors.